begin. Now we'll call up the panel. Michael, you want to come on up? And Christy, if you're back there somewhere. And Joe, there you guys are. So come on, you guys come on up. I also have bad news, or actually, the last person here doesn't get a mic. That's the. No, you guys can share. Or just one of you won't get to talk, or just hopefully you're really loud, but not as much bass, according to this gentleman. So let's start with just some introductions for you guys, just to kind of set the table before we get into this stuff. A bit about yourself and your company, and then we'll get into some of the other dynamics about what you're each doing, investing in, looking at, all that great stuff. But Christy, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I'm Christy. I work with Orange Silicon Valley. I'm a variety of new...
Please go to sleep easily. Michael, turn yours on.
Yes.
So I'm Christy. I work with Orange Silicon Valley. In a spiel that I'm going to have to give you, we are a fully owned subsidiary of Orange SA, which is actually based in Paris, France. To give you an idea of kind of the scope of how big we are, we're $40 billion euros in revenue per year, and we've got 260 million customers that we serve across 29 different countries, which is fascinating because we're operating in both developed and developing countries. And what I do with Orange is look for new startups in the VR and AR space, and I work with one of my colleagues here, Maxime, over there, also working on AR and VR with me. So very exciting.
What's the size of the OSV presence here in the city?
Yeah, we're about 50 people in our San Francisco office, and we've got 100 million in funding to look at new frontier technology.
We'll get into some of that. Joe.
Joe McHale. I lead worldwide open innovation for Lenovo. Basically, my team's function is to bridge the gap between organic R&D and external innovation. We're a strategic investor, which basically means that we focus on commercialization, and we use investment as a tool, among other things like acquisitions and direct commercial agreements, to engage with startups and bring them into the Lenovo family.
Michael.
Hi everyone, Michael Yang with Comcast Ventures, one of the partners there, and along with my colleague Song here in the second row, we do all the VR AR investing for a fund. We're a 17-year-old venture fund affiliated with Comcast Corporation, and we're a multi-stage investor, and since last year we've invested in 6 VR companies and 1 AR company.
Nice. Yeah, you guys are definitely known for having leaned into the space a great deal, so looking forward to getting into that. I feel like we could have this entire panel based on your portfolio companies as a sign of the trends that we're seeing out there. So we'll dive into some of those. I look forward to it. So you guys each also kind of went into this to some degree, but I want to kind of level set on each of your kind of investment theses, or whatever you can say about the types of companies, whether it be vertically focused or whether it be deal sizes. Christy, I know you can't talk about deal sizes, but anything you guys can tell us about the types of investments you're making if your firm does have a thesis that can be solidified.
Yeah, so we're really looking at frontier technology, anything businesses or companies that Orange can get into. It's not traditionally strategic in that it has to make sense right now, but if there's a longer term bet in terms of the strategic fit, that's definitely something we want to get into.
And I'll add to my question too, because that reminds me of it. There's different kind of flavors of strategic investing or corporate investing, where some can be just purely financial, and that's kind of what Google Ventures claims to be, and maybe they are. And then there's also the other end of the spectrum, pure strategic. If you guys could tell us or add to the comments, kind of where you sit on that spectrum.
Yeah, for Orange, I would say it's almost right in the middle, but leaning more so on the strategic side.
Yeah.
Weaver being an example of a new platform that we're betting on with VR and finding a content platform to really deliver the medium and experiment with it.
So we are, this particular team that I'm part of is a pure strategic play. We do have Lenovo Capital that is more of the Intel Capital kind of play. We're looking for financial returns. So what that really means is we have to have a path to commercialization. And we look at that in 2 different ways, either directly with a business unit, typically about 18 months to commercialization or shorter. A little longer than that, we're supporting our R&D efforts under the CTO function. So we're supporting both. In terms of focus areas, and I can speak to that a little bit, We support a breadth of products at Lenovo, if you're familiar with our product lines. So we get the privilege, and it's fun to kind of talk to so many different startups. More interestingly, though, is kind of a long-term play. So in addition to core innovation, making our products lighter, faster, cheaper, etc., we're looking at things like machine learning, new man-machine interfaces, haptic feedback, gesture, voice, etc., and of course AR, VR, among other things. Into deal size, if you're interested, we're typically we're a Series A/B investor, ranging from $2 to $10 million, but average is somewhere between the 2 and 5 range.
So for us at Comcast Ventures, given that we've been around for 17 years, we're fortunate that we have one source of capital, one limited partner, as they call it in the venture business, which is Comcast. We neither represent them or are a leading indicator of what Comcast's strategy plans to be. Our way of finding VR, AR was really just like any other venture firm that's looking for the next major computing platform. And if you look out there, people often posit that it could be autonomous driving in cars, it could be VR, AR, it could be robotics, it could be drones, etc. So as a diversified technology fund, we're always chasing big markets in computing, and we think this is one of them. In terms of how we picked what we picked in VR, as a fund, we're open to hardware, software, and services. So there are a lot of funds that only want to do software, others eschew hardware or don't want to do services. We're pretty open to it all, but what we have learned, because it's a fast-moving industry, is that certain segments within VR have taken off, and they have little curves and trajectories in and of themselves. So if I could, just let me walk you through our portfolio real quick. We are investors in AltSpace VR, Next VR, Baobab Studios, Felix and Paul Studios, Spaces VR, Kite and Lightning, and then also Meta on the AR side. There are at least 3 of them in there that can be characterized as more on the content creation side of VR, and that has not historically been a great, content creators are not a great venture kind of hunting ground because the exits just aren't really there. But, part of, I'm sure we'll get into this, is, VR is still going to take a while. Even those of us up on stage are pretty bullish. We think it's got many years to go. So if you're funding and starting companies today, how are you going to sustain yourself until that time of mass adoption? It's either going to be through venture capital money or it's going to be finding some form of monetization or subsidy. Content has been one of the hotter areas for venture funding. So we've been getting in early in Series A's primarily, and then been able to backstop those companies with large Series B's, and often on a global scale. So that is a hot segment. I don't know how much longer content will be hot, and I think other sectors will come in and go. So you can't really describe VR as a whole monolithic kind of investment climate. So I don't know if I answered.
No, well said. And I want to kind of drill down into a lot of those investments individually, particularly Meta, because Joe, you had absolutely a part of that as well. But Michael, first, you mentioned that your firm has leaned into VR as an investment source, and you have a kind of small team dedicated to just doing that. Before we get into the individual investments, what are your thoughts on, or the reasons and the drivers for that? Do you have any kind of 40,000-foot thoughts about the next platform or the next platform shift that is going to kind of consume a lot of consumers' time as a delivery channel for both content, advertising, other things, and all these kind of verticals we've gone over so far? What are your overall thoughts?
Yeah, the overall thoughts are this is a major computing platform. This primarily rides on the mobile phone ecosystem from a hardware, compute processing, even kind of app store dynamics. It's both consumer and enterprise. Frankly, in AR, just foreshadowing, we're very bullish on the enterprise AR opportunity. It's also very global out the gate, right? Other sectors that we invest in aren't immediately global, whereas this one, I would say certain parts of Asia are actually leading the US. And then what was the last time you saw a technology where you had Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Samsung, Sony, HTC beating each other's brains out, right? So if they're focused on this is gonna go somewhere, right? This is when pigs fly, basically.
Well said. So I want to have you guys weigh in on a similar question in terms of your overall views of AR and VR, particularly from the interest of your company. Like Christy, for example, Orange as a carrier and as a delivery of data. It seems like when we have more pervasive AR from a consumer perspective, that means just a lot more kind of bit loads and need for throughput. And this is happening at the advent of 5G. So in terms of more stuff going over those pipes, what's the kind of the Orange take on that opportunity?
So similar to echo what Michael has said about VR, there's a ton of telcos that are focusing on 5G and making that happen as well. So 5G is on the horizon, it's going to happen. We want to make it happen. And in fact, we, between 2015 and 2018, have committed 15 billion euros to even get this infrastructure out, right? So there's a lot of money behind getting 5G out, and VR is one of the driving factors for bandwidth and consumption between both consumers and enterprise.
So Joe, you guys are hitting this on two different levels. I mean, we've all talked about VR and AR, but in terms of a hardware leader in AR, for all the reasons that Carter showed us, but one thing we haven't really discussed yet is Lenovo's position as a PC manufacturer with some really high octane rigs for handling, PC, heavy VR as I referred to it earlier.
When you look at AR, VR, it's definitely a paradigm shift in user engagement and interface and interaction. So for us, that's a huge opportunity, both short-term and long-term. So when you look at sort of the DNA of Lenovo, and I really would rather ask the question what value we bring to the space rather than what opportunity we have. Obviously, the first thing you think of Lenovo is we're a compute platform. So we excel at customizing compute devices, whether they're in your pocket, on your desk, in the cloud, and for different verticals, different solutions. And that's something we do currently. We have high-end gaming notebooks for VR, and we have obviously smart devices in AR, the Tab 2 Pro, etc. And that's something we continue to support in the short term. Secondly, we think of ourselves as a world leader in user experience. Again, we look at our Yoga book and Tab 2 Pro, etc. We pay a lot of attention to the user experience, and I think in AR, VR, there's an element of contribution we have in enhancing the user experience in both environments, and it goes a little bit beyond keyboards and mouse and so on, but it's really how do we think about user engagement. And thirdly, we are an end-to-end solution company. So if you don't really know enough about Lenovo, obviously we do have the Motorola brands and mobile devices, smart devices, tablets, notebooks, PCs, but we're also in data centers and cloud services. And I think there's a need, when you look at this space, there's a need for a new architecture and infrastructure to support 3D content, hosting, distribution, collaboration, etc. And that's another element that we look at. So short term, there's plenty of opportunities. Long term, we have subscribed to the fact that tomorrow's PCs are not 2D screens, clamshells, and keyboards, etc. So sort of, we'd rather lead the way there rather than be cannibalized by other technologies. So we're very, very active.
Yeah, nice. That's a commendable message too. So Michael, I want to go back to one thing you said about content and the opportunity with content, and it also goes back to the kind of chicken and egg concept we were talking about earlier, where content drives hardware and vice versa. And that's not just where we're often focusing on when we talk about VR, which is heavy gaming, highly rendered and produced content, entertainment, cinematic. And it's also starting to be a lot of other things such as live action capture and especially sports. We're seeing sports take off. So tell us about NextVR.
Sure. NextVR, based out in Orange County, is the leading live broadcaster in VR. So if you think about live events, there's nothing bigger than sports, and then second behind would be music concerts. So these are obviously things you're going to stop whatever it is you're doing. You might even pay a ticket to kind of go to these things. Super Bowl-esque moments. And NextVR has partnered with broadcasters like Fox Sports, as well with music concert organizers like Coldplay, and they'll be streaming these events into your headset. So if you couldn't be there, they'll basically put you either on the sideline, on the bench, behind the goal, etc. And it's an interesting genre of content, live sports in particular, where there's still a lot of money kind of behind it, and you see that in the traditional broadcast cable world too.
And beyond just the consumer use case, what I always go back to is that for broadcasting and cable, one of the saving graces, the kind of mitigating the cord cutting movement, is live sports. And this is something that amplifies that already existing advantage.
That's right. I mean, it's Super Bowl, it's the Olympics, it's the World Cup, it's these kinds of things. If you're passionate about a particular sport and you have a passion about a particular team, you'll go to great lengths to kind of be a fan. So.
Now we're going to also take some audience questions, so think about the questions you want to ask and raise your hand. I'll probably ask another couple questions, but raise your hand and I'll walk you with the mic. We have probably about 15 minutes left in the panel, so we want to bring you guys into it. So another form of content, I guess you could say, is social media. And it's more about kind of interactions than it is content. But at OC3, that some of you went to and a lot of us probably watched, a lot of announcements were made around the social integration of VR and those immersive experiences. And Michael, you mentioned you're an investor in Altspace. So talk a little bit about what you see behind the kind of social VR movement, and you guys can also jump in as well if you have an opinion about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. VR skeptics would probably poo-poo VR as being too isolating, and when you're completely immersed, not really engaged and interacting with others. It's really just the opposite. There's plenty of application developers and content creators that are going to be creating experiences that are fully collaborative, communicative, and all that. Altspace VR is just a platform where events can be hosted in VR, and anyone can kind of go on, create their own event, and then invite people to participate. You participate as an avatar, right? So we're still in a really interesting kind of product and philosophical debate as how do we want to manifest ourselves in virtual and digital spaces, very photorealist, kind of, which freaks people out. I mean, we see that in the robotic space, or more as an avatar kind of driven expression. But anyways, it's an open platform, and Altspace is seeing all kinds of interesting use cases on there. When they first started, they posited that people would go on and play games. So you see people playing checkers and chess and Dungeons and Dragons with friends over great distances in a very immersive environment. More recently, they actually collaborated with NBC News on replicating Democracy Plaza and actually broadcasting the first presidential debate in there, so you could have Clinton and Trump kind of supporters kind of beating each other up or going at it kind of in a virtual space, in addition to kind of the usual online stuff as well. But you have people giving webinars and sales presentations in a B2B kind of enterprise sales setting, and a whole host of other things. So I think that's super fascinating. And then just real quickly on my other comment, with VR, sometimes you actually want to take a break, right? I've heard some people say that we're on our phones, we're always being social and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you just kind of want to lock down, have 2 hours to yourself. That's why people actually like flying on planes every once in a while. You can just shut up, put on headphones, and zone out. So that may be the escapism that VR also offers in an alternative modality. Just so it all depends.
And the kind of avatar rendering, the uncanny valley, humanistic versus, I believe the technical term is cartoony. Christy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think social is really interesting. I think 2 of the most memorable experiences are actually social in VR that I've had. One was playing Pong with somebody else, but almost like in a space environment. So the ball is floating around and you're playing with someone real time with one of your friends. It's this shared experience, and I think VR being isolating, yes, is something that people keep talking about, but bringing in other people to experience the same thing that you're experiencing is something that's a huge obstacle, and that's going to make it so much more compelling once it does take off.
So I want to switch gears and talk about some AR stuff. Are there any audience questions in the meantime? Anyone want to jump in? Okay, 2 here, 3. Well, I think this Jan comes first. There you go.
Well, mine is on AR, so maybe preempting your next topic.
That's okay.
So you talked about entertainment and you've talked about social. What about, and I'm talking mainly about AR, industrial or maintenance, construction, these kind of applications? How far away are in the future, or not, or how present are they?
Sure, I'll go first and let you jump in. those are exactly the enterprise AR use cases that I'm particularly interested in. You know, I put customer service, field support kind of stuff in there as well. They're the beginnings of very vertical specific companies chasing those opportunities, but what I would say is, you know, if you're a general purpose developer or technology person, trying to understand the vertical is a harder thing. So I'm looking for people who might come out of oil and gas, might come out of aerospace, might come out of mining and construction, and have a traditional business process, have traditionally crappy software they have to deal with, but they just see an AR kind of overlay to their traditional processes, making it much more efficient, much more productive, much more intelligent. That's what we're looking for, and we're beginning to kind of see that stuff. But I think that is the future of AR, in my opinion, and that's what we're particularly excited about.
To add to that, I definitely agree with Michael. I think the near-term opportunities are in industrial, professional, enterprise use cases in AR, especially with HMDs. So if you take the experience away from the mobile device, the cost and the experience of putting on some type of, what do we call it, glasses today, right? Some type of head mounted display, most of which are tethered today. That has to come at a high ROI, and that comes from warehouse management, remote maintenance, and these types of applications. So I think that's short-term, huge. I think there are other things like 3D 3D CAD reviews and so on, that the cost of printing or building those prototypes is prohibitively expensive, so having a 3D model. So those are the use cases that I think HMDs are going to hit the market, you know, in first.
Definitely agree with both of you guys. I think what's interesting, so let me back up with the 5G. I did a lot of research around 5G, and what's interesting is to see the evolution of the network. So every 10 years, approximately, there's a new evolution of the network. So it goes 2G, 3G, 4G, and then 5G is on its cusp. And so we're approaching 5G very soon, and I think one of the huge enablers for AR is going to be 5G, because these use cases aren't going to be as valuable if there's not a sense of urgency. If the urgency can be enabled by 5G, where a specialist can come in, then it's even more valuable since you got it in a split second.
Thank you. I'm interested in what you guys think are the biggest remaining technical challenges to mass adoption of VR and AR. Is it, and I'm expecting answers like, is it the pixel density of the screens isn't high enough? Is it the inside-out tracking? Is it the controller? Is it or 3D audio? Where all of the above?
Ryan answered that question.
Yeah, so it's funny because I've been thinking about that a lot, and that seems to be a question that keeps coming up over and over at these conferences. And I was trying to think to myself, what kind of acronym can I make for myself to really get this down pat, right? So I actually came up with something called like a 3C. So in my head, it's really cost, content, and comfort. So in terms of cost, it's the compute power of being available on your phone and being available to everybody, and figuring out how can we deliver a high quality experience without jutter to you at an affordable price. And then in terms of content, it's not only gaming content, but really valuable content that you can maybe socialize with other people, or maybe you can go do work with other people in VR. And then in terms of comfort, that brings in the audio and the visual aspects. So are you comfortably interacting with this content? Because I put a lot of VR on people, and they tend to reach up their hands on a Gear VR, and I'm like, well, your hands aren't connected to anything, so I'm not really sure what you're reaching out. So like, how can you make content actually comfortable for people to listen to see, and to interact with naturally?
I want to make a quick comment, then you can jump in, Joe. I think a lot of it has to do with the efficient use of the kind of smaller pipes you have for giant data payloads. And that comes down to compression. It comes down to a lot of things. But one thing I would recommend you watch is, some of you may have seen it, I keep mentioning OC3, but Michael Abrash, who's the chief scientist of Oculus, essentially gave a half-an-hour presentation on kind of what the current technical challenges are and where he believes they're going and what needs to fall into place together. You can probably find it on YouTube and a number of other places, but I'd highly recommend watching that. It'll take a half an hour and answer a lot of your questions. Sorry, go ahead. Oh wait, Joe, you wanted to answer that question first.
Well, to echo what Christy said and kind of make a distinction between VR and AR, The way we're looking at it is in VR. I think it's mostly about content and content availability, and some of the things Michael said about collaboration and so on. We at Lenovo are looking a lot at that from an infrastructure perspective and sort of the future of hosting and delivering and the necessary computational requirements. It's one thing to see 3D content on your device. It's another to collaborate with someone within the same network. It's completely different to actually edit and modify across the globe. So those are things, we're looking at split systems in terms of technology advancement, split systems, edge computing, and thin clients that can enable those kinds of experiences. So content, I think, is big in VR. Interfaces, just like Christy said, is like, how do I interact naturally within that environment? In AR, it's I believe it's the optical engine. I think wider field of view, higher resolution for sure. Cost as well. It needs to be affordable to the end user, and I think size going down to glasses is really the big evolution of AR that converges the two together.
Sir, and then it's gentleman over here. There you go.
Thank you. So it's more like an investment perspective. What are some of the biggest opportunities you guys looking for? Like, what are some of the biggest unsolved challenges in VR? And where are you looking? What kind of investment opportunities you guys looking for in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I guess leading your question to the previous one, I'd say like Facebook buying Oculus was the announcement of the game, and right now we're all taking batting practice. We're not even in the first inning yet, so much of technology on all fronts and all parts of the stack still need to be iterated. There's nothing that's particularly good at any level. So I think you could chase all of it. I think the question you guys have to think about as technologists and entrepreneurs is what problems do I want to address? Because I'm ultimately trying to build a company that creates value, because there's going to be very big companies that have their own roadmaps that are going to have tons of people working on stuff. So do you want to be in that slipstream? Because chances are you're going to get toppled, right? So you have to figure out how you play with well over half a dozen global players that are putting billions of dollars to work here. The good thing is, as I said, it's completely wide open territory to kind of go after stuff.
So I actually have two questions. So Christy, what are the big bottlenecks that you see in that are holding back user-generated content for the more social VR applications? And my second question is mainly for you guys is, for a consumer-based social VR product, everyone is always asking for kind of approaching corporate venture funds. What is the right stage to kind of begin initiating that, and what should that approach be?
So obstacles around social VR. I mean, like Michael's saying, there's so many problems around things. It's kind of hard to tackle that question because there's just so many problems with it. One is that there's not really a universal medium that everyone can turn to that is where you go to publish your content, and the editing tools from a user-generated perspective are very difficult. I think one company that's trying to tackle that problem is Vicarious VR and trying to make content available and easily editable. But that's definitely a difficult problem. And I think the other major problem is looking at yourself as an avatar. Are you cartoony or are you super real? And I mean, where do you bridge the gap between the uncanny valley and a super highly cartoonized avatar? And so the defining those interactions and figuring out how to interact with other people in VR is a huge problem. But like Michael also said, Facebook's trying to tackle that problem right now.
So what stage in terms of social VR, what stage would we be interested in? The first word that comes to mind is traction. So I think I don't want to say it's easy, but I mean, you're building software. It's all about the user experience. It's user engagement. So proving traction. Where I sit, again, as a strategic investor, it's less about, size of the check, what round we're getting in. It's more about our confidence level that you can actually take this product globally to the masses, and we will help you do that, but you got to show some traction. So, at some point there's a metric of user adoption that we would be looking at.
just do your homework on the venture fund that you're trying to approach. Have they already invested in VR, AR, or they haven't, right? If they haven't, then you got a tall bar to clear. If they have, then you can usually see at what stage, what round did they join, and that'll give you a roadmap of what their appetite is.
One more question over here.
Hey, thank you. Great discussion. My name is Val. I'm a founder of a mid-sized business. It's been around for 14 years. It's called Bright Talk. Think of it like TED Talk, but for business professionals. And I'm now essentially in a situation where I've got millions of professionals using the platform for free to make better decisions in their career. And now I'm starting to think about how I can go through a digital transformation to start getting ahead of the curve to introduce AR and VR in the context of B2B learning. So I've got a couple of questions. One, is that B2B content area one that you've seen traction in, and what are the examples? And two, what type of skills transformation and team transformation is required to hire different type of people to build out those experiences, both hardware and software?
We've seen a little bit of that with Altspace, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how to answer your question most appropriately. So I think if you want to jump into VR, there's nothing, you have to get your hands dirty, right? There are really no established places where one can go learn it. So that's why it's great we have organizations like that were just previewed that are going to try to teach the next generation of developers to kind of get involved on this. We have historically been focused on backing people who've been noodling and working in VR for at least 2 years now, right? That means they've been committed to the cause. We're working on some of the first DK units, suffered through all the hardware issues and found workarounds and hacks to that. You're going to get a lot of new people rushing into it. So the question is, are they really passionate about that, or they're just kind of, optionality, poking around to see if they want to kind of do this thing? I think in the B2B setting, an interesting area is corporate training. Right? Any of you guys who've worked at large corporations, you have mandatory training things that you have to take for legal compliance reasons and all that kind of stuff. Or in certain job classes, they're really part of doing your job. So actually offering immersive VR or even AR kind of experiences to solve that or make the training less brutal, frankly, I think is a really interesting kind of use case or application. Yeah.
Let's see what you guys want to do. One more question from this gentleman over here.
What kind of opportunities you see at the intersection of virtual reality and blockchain autonomous technologies?
Are you guys looking at that?
I'm personally just starting to look at blockchain, and it's an interesting, obviously, technology and opportunity in different verticals. The only thought that comes to mind is, with VR, it adds a certain level, I guess, of dimension to what data you can track as part of a transaction and so on. Possibly another digital signal if you're talking about collaboration between avatars or virtual identities. But it's an interesting question that I personally haven't thought about too much.
So we're cutting into our cocktail half-hour time just by a little bit, but I want to go into that time a little bit because I wanted to ask you guys, there actually already have been some natural questions about AR and we've dug into it, so I'm satisfied with the level of discussion around AR, but I also wanted to tee both of you up to talk a little bit about Meta, which is going into more advanced forms of AR, in that same kind of cropping of companies that includes HoloLens and Magic Leap, and what's being referred to as mixed reality. Tell us about that kind of next era of AR and what that entails through the lens of the investment you guys made in Meta.
Absolutely, if I may start. I think Meta, the guys at Meta are superstars. I mean, they're really trying to completely change the experience of, a user, a consumer interacting with a compute device. Several things stood out, and I'll say the first time I put on a Meta headset, it was like the first time I used a smartphone, and all I saw was possibilities. They truly have a wide enough today field of view. You feel completely immersed. I think they are leading the way with what they call a zero learning curve interface. You're completely immersed in interacting with virtual objects. You're not doing gestures in space at something further out in space. So a lot of those, standard technical features stood out, but I think most importantly, as an investor, what attracted us to them is a couple of other things. They're truly owning the user experience and building a complete, full stack, a system level solution. Everything from the hardware to an OS to a platform, as well as seeding that platform with productivity use cases. And that leads to my second point, which their focus as well as our focus is on enterprise productivity solutions, leading to sort of the future of compute where your desk becomes your desktop. And there's no need for anything else. You have unlimited windows or folders and devices and objects you can put in space. So all in all, it's that lead, and then again, back to being a strategic investor, they need pretty powerful computers and infrastructure to support that vision, and we're very happy to engage with them and partner with them.
Yeah, completely agree on that front, and I think as I've already seeded earlier, enterprise AR is something we're particularly interested in, as compared to Magic Leap, which is very most focused on consumer AR and entertainment use cases, which is just going to take that much longer because consumers are much more fickle. But I'd say right now, Microsoft HoloLens is very aggressive out there. Interestingly, from what I gathered, HoloLens is part of the Windows team, so they treat it as an operating system. And Microsoft is doing what they usually do, which is curry favor with independent software developers, having them build to that platform, and then they have systems integrators and channels and all that kind of stuff to help take them to market. And Microsoft is very good at rolling out stuff to the enterprise, and Meta's going to have to keep pace, basically.
The AR version of Clippy is pretty scary. Speaking of Uncanny Valley, Chris, you've been looking, and we've talked a little bit about AR in some other kind of verticals we haven't discussed yet, like education, medicine. Anything you want to add to the kind of AR discussion about kind of cool opportunities?
No, I mean, it's very similar to Michael. We're looking at enterprise as well from an AR perspective. And I think really the question that we have is, how much ROI is it really driving? It's still such an early question to ask, but we're just starting to breaking up at that problem.
Well, to close off, I want to give you guys the chance to kind of talk on a practical level to all these folks about kind of what you're looking at. And this gentleman asked a great question about the technologies that are missing in what you're looking at. Similar question, but on the level of what types of companies or what types of entrepreneurs or what types of pitches do you like to see? Or conversely, what are some kind of red flags of things you don't like to see? For anyone out there that's like pitching investors, and what's just parting advice on a practical level that you want to leave these guys with?
You
get this. He's first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give too much of a blanket statement, but obviously transformative companies that aren't just looking to put something that we know like in 2D into 3D, but really showing value and driving a new experience and driving a new way that we're interacting with technology. Obviously seasoned veterans that have experience in launching startups as well. So platforms in general are also really great for us. Looking at new industries to get into obviously requires a platform, so we look for platforms as well. But just in general, passionate individuals, if you ever have anything that you're super passionate about, I always love talking to passionate entrepreneurs. Even if it's not a fit for Orange, I'm always happy to pass it on to the right investors. So I just love super passionate people.
Well said. Michael?
So I think the first fork you have to decide, are you starting your own VR AR company or should you join a VR AR company, right? The assumption that you should always start your own company, I question, right? There are now some very established VR AR companies out there that you could actually go do your 12 months, your 18 months, your 24 months and get very well trained, meet a lot of great people, and just set yourself up to have better purview on what the real opportunities in the space are. We can all speculate, but we're, at least a couple of us are more on the outside. We're not practicing the art of VR or AR creation the way that you guys are going to be thinking about it. So going to Oculus or going to HTC or going to a well-funded startup isn't the worst thing in the world. I'd say, I'd ask yourself, if you're going to go and do your own thing, what do you know more than anyone else in the world, right? If you're going to be, I want to do something in healthcare and VR, then it better be because, you're a surgeon, you work with MRI, CT scans all day long, you have somebody who can do 3D models, and you want to put it in VR kind of application, show your patients and do pre-op and post-op, and you can figure out how you're going to get paid for that by health insurance companies and all that kind of stuff, right? It shouldn't be because, hey, I like 3D models and this is a cool piece of data that I want to render in VR, right? That's not going to get you anywhere. So again, it's kind of like think through the whole business process that you want to enable in VR and AR and why you're best suited versus anyone else in the world as a developer and a team to kind of go after it. Otherwise, I'd look at some really great emerging VR and AR companies and just say, well, maybe I go hang out there for a year and meet some cool people, and then I've got a PM, I've got a front-end guy, I've got a back-end guy, I've got a dev, whatever, and we can go off and start our own thing.
It's good advice. Joe, you get the last word. Any parting advice on that level, or just any advice in general that you think these guys could benefit from?
Absolutely. I think to me it's people that build businesses, people that actually build valuable startups, and that's really what I personally look for most when we're evaluating an opportunity. We do our diligence, the 3 T's, technology, TAM, team, and so on. We make sure that the opportunity is there, the solution is at the right time. But I think there's an element that's almost intangible I always look for, which is coachability of the leadership team. If you got to be humble enough, you got to have a big vision, huge passion, laser focused on what you're building, for whom, for what user. But you've also got to be coachable and realize that as you grow, as you raise funds, as you partner with strategics and others, you are going to have to admit that there are things you don't know, and there are things that you have to go out and other, maybe even more senior talent that you have to hire and acquire. In terms of advice working with Lenovo, for example, for us, what's attractive, if you're a hardware company, we're always very interested in potential white label in China. As a China-based company, you can grow your business in North America, and we can complement you with entry into the China market in parallel. Again, back to the coachability, are you open for us to help you grow faster and accelerate, beat your competition through supply chain and distribution advice, etc. And if you're a software platform, again, how do we partner together? Start thinking commercially about the opportunities to really get into the market early through large partnerships.
Well, that's a great place to end it. So I want to thank all of you guys for sticking with us even a few minutes late. Your reward is more drinks, and we have another kind of 20 minutes left through the duration of the event. So please stick around, talk to these guys, have a few drinks, and join me in thanking the panel.